Ashish, are you there? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. Hope you all are having a great time so far. Up next, we have a session on building a strong ecosystem for the productive use of renewable energy. The panel in this session will try to examine the expectation of the stakeholders from each other and how they can collaborate to build a strong ecosystem. This is being moderated by Abhishek Jain, Fellow CEEW and Director Powering Livelihoods. Before I hand it over to Abhishek, a quick intro on Powering Livelihoods. This session, which is being powered by Powering Livelihoods, is a CEEW Will Grow initiative, which aims to boost India's rural economy by scaling up the penetration of clean energy powered appliances for livelihoods. So over to you, Abhishek.
Thank you, Anusha. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Abhishek Jain from the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. I have been joined today by two co-panelists. One of them is right now, I think, facing a little bit of technical issue and should be here with us soon. Simi Sareen and Ashish Kumar. We are also expecting Mr. Jethani, who is the Director of Grid at Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, to join us today in this conversation. But he has been pulled into an urgent internal meeting, and we are hoping that he'll be with us soon. Meanwhile, let me start with a brief introduction to Simi. Simi has been a veteran entrepreneur, if I may say, and has years of experience in looking at the financing space for the social development sector, and has led various roles from private banks to organizations like IntelliGrow at IntelliCap, or rather the Avishkar Group, then working with the Grameen Impact, and later founded an organization called Loans for SME, which has been particularly looking at providing financing to small and medium scale enterprises. And most recently, I think about 6 to 8 months ago, Simi has co-founded a new organization called Green Funder. And I'll let Simi briefly talk about it while we also wait for Ashish to join in. So Simi, do you like to briefly introduce about what Green Funder is trying to do?
Yes, sure, Abhishek. Thanks for the introduction. So Green Funder, as the name suggests, is essentially, formulated as a structure or a vehicle to encourage more climate finance into India. And we are doing it in 2 or 3 different ways, Abhishek. I think one is to, spend a lot of time, I think, identifying what gaps exist in the climate finance ecosystem. And we believe as a team that while India has done really well in certain sectors like say solar or wind financing, there are other nascent areas, be it energy efficiency, be it things like mobility, or all the new and upcoming technologies in adaptation, especially waste, agri supply chain, that need a lot of financial support. So what Green Funder is trying to do is to identify gaps that exist and then find and build structures to bridge those. So our first pilot or our first initiative, so as to say, is to find a way to fund more green assets, and we are trying to take a more cash flow driven approach to it, to say that rather than saying what banks do, which is that if you are doing well as a company, we look at your balance sheet and fund the assets. Can we look at what benefits derive from the assets themselves? So if you're putting a solar dehydrator, you are getting cash flows from it, and can we use those cash flows to then pay for the assets over 5 to 7 years, and can we fund that? So the first pilot is an asset financing pilot, but over time Green Funder will expand to identify and fill more gaps in the climate finance ecosystem.
Sure. Thanks, Simi. I'm sure we'll learn more about what are the plans you have going forward as we'll go deeper into this conversation. Now, let me introduce the second co-panelist here with us, who is Ashish Kumar from the Shell Foundation. Ashish again comes with years of experience and has had various hats over the years, both in the private sector as well as in the sort of development sector, so to say. And currently he leads the innovation sort of strategy within the Shell Foundation, and looking for new opportunities, cross-cutting across the portfolio of the work that Shell Foundation looks into. I'll probably also request Ashish to maybe spend a minute or two to briefly elaborate about his work before we jump into the conversation. Ashish, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Abhishek. Sorry for the connectivity issues the last few minutes. Glad to be joining here together with Simi and potentially Mr. Jathani as well. And thanks for hosting this. And just for everyone's benefit, I'll just mention like a couple of lines about Shell Foundation. We are a UK registered charity based out of London, and most of our work is in Africa and within India, within Asia. We are a venture philanthropic entity, and our model is to catalyze market-based solutions for development, which basically means acting as a early stage, funder for business models which have potential to scale with a clear impact lens on livelihood impact and clean energy. So our KPIs include anything to do with number of amount of CO2 reduced to jobs created to low income livelihood impacted. Our work spans across energy access and mobility, and a lot of work within energy access is linked to agriculture. And we work closely with FCDO UK, aid and USAID. And in this, in the context of this topic, um, I would just mention that uh, it's a unique opportunity what we are trying to do with Powering Livelihoods program with CEW and Will Grow, and we have uh, we have done quite a bit of ecosystem-based interventions in the market, other than driving direct funding to the enterprises. And within that context, it's a unique approach where we are bringing support to the enterprises directly in sort of an accelerator model, along with trying to work with the central and state governments to see what sort of support is needed to drive the entire sector in the form of policy guidelines or any other evidence generation for the entire sector. So I'll stop there, Abhishek, unless you want me to focus on any other aspects at the moment or questions. Abhishek Rose.
My end. Could any one of you confirm if you're able to hear me well?
Now we can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you, Abhishek.
Okay, great. Thanks. So thank you both, Simi and Ashish, for the introduction to what you are doing and what you are trying to do. Let me just set up the context for the discussion and then we'll get going. As I understand, we have been joined today by various enterprises in particular who are looking at the clean energy space in general and clean energy and productive use space in particular. And apart from enterprises, we have a few other ecosystem players, including investors, financiers, including those who are here with me on this panel. So I think let me just set it up. One thing is very clear that for any sector, in any social impact space that we are looking at, enterprises are playing a central role. They are the ones who are driving innovation as well as entrepreneurship, and they are the ones who have the potential to actually impart impact at scale. But we also know that enterprises alone cannot do it all on themselves. They need critical support across the innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem cycle, so to say. And all this support need to come from a set of critical players. I mean, apart from incubators and accelerators like of those of Wilbro who have been handholding these enterprises, we also need investors coming in. We need financiers putting in the debt as required. And we, of course, need policymakers and policies which can help scale some of these initiatives beyond individual enterprise scope and ambit. Now, what we're going to do, and hopefully we'll also have Mr. Jathani joining in to actually reflect on each of these three elements, investments, financing, and policy for this particular ecosystem, which is decentralized renewable energy for livelihoods, for productive use, and try and learn that what is it that each of these stakeholders are looking for from enterprises in order to extend their support, and what is it that each of these stakeholders can extend to enterprises as a support so that enterprises can actually flourish, grow, and scale up their ambitions, their sales, their revenues, and their impact. With that, let me start first with Ashish and bring in some of the perspectives. While, as Ashish mentioned, he is part of the Shell Foundation, which, despite its name as a foundation, does do a lot of investments into the clean energy enterprises. So I would request Ashish to actually wear dual hats. One is, of course, as an ecosystem, representing an ecosystem organization, but also representing the mindset of the investment community is looking at the sector. So let me start with the broad understanding, Ashish, like from where you look at the space. What do you see as the potential and promise of the sector? And what do you think are the main roadblocks in realizing that potential?
Yeah, thanks, Abhishek. So I think when we talk about the sector here, just to define that system boundaries, we are talking about energy for livelihoods, which for everyone's understanding how we can use renewable energy for livelihood impact, especially income generation, and we call that within energy access. The need for like higher tiers of energy. So if you look at tier 1 and 2, it's basically like household lighting. But if you look at tier 3 plus, where we look at anything from applications in in agriculture like solar water pumps to agro processing to in textiles like solar powered weaving machines. So if we look at within that context, within those boundaries, I think there's a huge opportunity, as the work, some of the work you guys have done in the past has shown that there's more than $50 billion of market opportunity to be realized. There's more than I think 4 million micro enterprises who have lack of who mention lack of energy as inhibitor to their growth. And I think there's a lot of work within energy access has focused on the solar home system market, or how mini grids are deployed in both across in Asian countries as well as in Africa. But I'll list down the key challenges and like maybe 2 or 3 points. The first one is uh, one of the basic tenet of this program, as we know, is the lack of scale and volumes, which is needed to attract any significant commercial funding. Uh, there are a lot of enterprises which operate in the micro enterprise segment, but they're not able to sort of graduate to a SME level, or they have enough sort of volumes to attract any significant equity or debt players. The way like these guys look at the risk return profile, it's not there for the energy for livelihoods sector. And the other challenge related to that is lack of aggregation, which is stopping even the energy access players. Like um, there's no way where you can pool in assets of a number of these enterprises together and create a product or opportunity which can attract funding on top of it. So if you look at how microfinance industry 10 to 20 years ago grew, there's things like securitization that helped sort of take it to the next level in terms of attracting capital. So I think there are interventions needed to enable that sort of aggregation, even though the underlying assets there, like be it water pump or solar powered receiving machines, they could be different, but there we need some underlying both technology as well as financing intervention to enable that aggregation. And I think the last challenge I'll mention is the lack of in a way data, which and evidence that can help the investors, both commercial and even donors, to look at sector more seriously. We'll get into that, I think, in more detail further in our conversation, but I'll stop there.
Great. Thanks, Ashish, for laying that out. I think in many ways you sort of echoed some of the sentiments with which we actually started even thinking about a need for a platform like Powering Livelihoods, which can help with some of these challenges, if not all of them. Yeah, no, that's pretty well articulated, and I hope that some of the enterprises in the room are making a note of some of these challenges, because while a few of them can be addressed individually at enterprise level, some of them do need many enterprises to come together for us to solve some of them. Now let me turn to Simi, and I'm maybe jumping the gun a little bit, but let me do it anyway. So I think, Simi, one thing is that, and since you come from that financing background with years of experience, you know that financiers are typically always a little more risk averse. They want to see a mature market. They want to see sufficient policy push, sufficient market activity happening in a particular space before they become comfortable in terms of lending to these products in a mainstream fashion. Whether it is about the end user lending who is adopting and trying to adopt these products, or whether it is the enterprise financing who are trying to manufacture and sell or deploy these solutions. So as Ashish mentioned, like while the potential of the sector, at least on paper, seems reasonably high. I mean, we're talking about a market of almost 50 billion US dollars. The on-ground proof points are limited. That scale is not there on the ground yet. So how do you see this space, and what is your interest as a financier to look at this space?
Sure, Abhishek. So I think we have to essentially, in my mind, differentiate between parts of the problem that have already been solved and the ones that currently exist. And I'll tell you why that's important, right? Because financing for energy access, and especially for, I would say, income generating, clean tech assets, has evolved quite a bit in the last 5 to 7 years that I've been tracking this sector. And I'll break it down into 3 or 4 different segments, right? So you're right. There are 2 parts of the financing. One is financing the enterprises themselves who are creating these innovative solutions and selling them. And there, I think what has happened is that if you look at all the incubators, accelerators, seed funds today, I think the initial funding that you need, anywhere from say 100,000 to say $500,000, you potentially have several options today to get that funding, right? So this is what we call the go-to-market money, essentially, right? So essentially, can you prove that you have created something, and can you find your first few clients? And I think we now have several organizations who are at that stage, right? From there, I would say from finding your first customer, finding that your technology works in a lab setting, to actually proving it, in a real life situation. And to actually then going from say your first 100 users, if it's a retail product, to your 100,000 users. That's where the challenge is, right? That's where the challenge that most of the enterprises face, because at that point, I think one, debt is not even an option that's being looked at. I think it's a very equity problem at that point of time, and we simply don't have enough, I would say, Series A, Series B, Series C options that exist today. It's pretty similar to, I think, if you look back 5-7 years when Omnivore first came in as an agri-tech investor, and they were the only players in town. And then I think it's now evolved to a situation where you have a lot more data on agri supply chain, you have a lot more investments happening, and much larger investments happening. So I think clean tech, and I would say especially the segment of energy access and innovation is pretty much at that stage, right? Which means that we need support for enterprises beyond just incubation at IIT Bombay, right? Because incubation is great and everyone does that. But I think it's incubation to a stage where they're ready to raise like $5 million. That's where a lot of good work is falling away. The good news is that debt providers are coming in early, and we have a lot more of them now, right? So it's still debt, which means that for someone to take a loan, you still need to be selling something, you still need to be making some money, and you still need to show that I'm going to be able to repay this loan on time. But with players like Seekers, Caspian, Ananya, Manuvia, you actually now have a lot more options than existed like 5 years ago, of players who are willing to take risk early, who are willing to back loss-making enterprises, because either they can show specific cash flows that they are able to prove will repay the loan on time, or they have investors, they have equity money coming in. So we are seeing a lot more enterprise funding happening, right? That said, all of these enterprises have the challenge of saying that we'll only do say loans that are like 1 crore and above, because smaller loans don't make sense for us. So you have to get to a certain stage before you are able to access those loans. So that gap exists, right? And that gap, and Ashish, you're more of an expert in this than I am, but I think that gap needs to be filled by equity money, by more, venture studios, by more seed investors, by more risk capital coming into the segment as early as possible, right? So that's the enterprises. But I would say that, for what we saw in solar and what we're seeing in mobility, for example, is that people are getting funded once they get past that. I don't know how to go from 1 user to 50,000 users, but once they get to a certain scale, there are investors getting interested, right? So it's a question of how do you get a segment to that scale where there's enough data available that technology works, their users are willing to pay for it, and they're willing to pay for it over a long time, and this will scale. So that challenge still remains. But I think the two ends have been solved. So incubation and private equity has been solved. Now, coming to the actual end user funding, right? Because a lot of these enterprises are offering solutions that need end users to pay for it. I think that's still complex, right? Because I think a lot of microfinance work, went to saying, how do we fund a little bit of money for a home lighting system, right? And we solved that about a few years ago. But now we are coming back and saying, how do we set up, an on-farm cold storage that's going to cost a few lakh rupees? Or how do we, do better agro processing? Or how do we kind of, do better, textiles that are backed by clean tech? And all of these need capital investment by segments that are not traditionally creditworthy. So I think there's work happening, there's work that we are doing, there's work a bunch of other people are doing. But I think the solution there is a combination of a few different things, right? One is to figure out, can we find the right category of assets to back? And by I mean the right category of assets, I mean income generating assets rather than consumption assets. Because if you can show that the asset that you put in and funded for 5 lakhs is actually making that farmer an additional 20,000 rupees of income a month, which means that there's enough room in that asset to repay the loan, right? That will get funded. Will it get funded on the first 5 assets? Probably not. But once you have deployed a few of those with equity money and you can show that savings exist and savings exist over long term, those will get funded. And we've seen that happen increasingly, right? So I think that's one. Second, there will be assets that don't have that use case, right? There isn't enough cash flows from that assets deployment to repay the loan. And the end user themselves are not, don't have other income to show or, enough credibility to take a loan just beyond that. And I think there we are seeing, for example, take clean cook stores, right? For example, and there we're seeing CSR money step in, right? We are seeing instances. So for example, one of the foundations I work with has recently struck a deal with a large maize buyer to basically help farmers deploy innovative solutions to do, basically cleaner technologies, use cleaner technologies to grow maize, and then they're using carbon credits to fund that, right? So it can be CSR money, it can be carbon credits. Both are tough markets to crack, but options exist. And I think they exist in small numbers, but they're coming to market, right? And then I think finally, there's also, the whole idea of saying if cash flows are going to pay for, say, 80% of it, can we supplement the lender's risk by bringing in guarantees? Or bringing in, can we kind of do more structured deals? Can we do more, transactions where there is more than one kind of lenders coming in to do blended finance that makes a transaction viable for the lender? Look, lenders are always going to be risk averse. They need their money back on time with return. It's how do you structure the deal to make it viable for them? And we have several people who are willing to come to market and, want to structure those deals today.
Yeah. No, thanks, Amy. I think you've covered quite a bit there. And it's also good to see that there are questions already coming in from the audience. In fact, I was going to make a call to the all the audience that please do keep bringing in your questions. We want to keep it as conversational as possible. Because of tech limitation, we won't be able to listen to you, but we certainly can read all the questions that are coming in, and we'll keep taking them sort of interspersed within our conversations. And Simi, there's one which is quite timely here, which is simply trying to get another view from you on one of the statements that you made, which was like, has incubation really been solved? And what about the women entrepreneurs in this space? Data says that there are still huge gaps. Any quick reflections? Yeah.
Yes, there are, right? So I think incubation has been solved for a certain kind of population, right? And we all know that, a lot of our successful incubatees in clean tech space come from a very, limited segment, right? It's basically our top tier engineering colleges who are essentially setting up these really awesome incubation labs and bringing forth technologies. That's solved, right? Now, I I know it's kind of the unpopular view, but I don't think it's a men versus women problem in India that much. In fact, I say this confidently as a woman entrepreneur that I think it's not a question of investors supporting women entrepreneurs any differently from men. I think it's a question of pipeline. We just don't have enough pipeline of good enterprises coming to these incubation centers, right? And which is why I think incubation needs to be broadened. And I think where incubation does not exist today is a lot of, you know, tier 2 and tier 3 cities where, there aren't that many options, there isn't. And I think that applies to men and women, equally. It's not been solved, I would say, beyond, a handful of highly successful incubation programs, right?
Yeah.
Where it works really well, right? I know Shell kind of, incubated in Telegrove, and I was part of it, and they have done a beautiful job. There are other foundations that are doing a good job at it. So I guess it is a scale problem, right? It's just that just like not every idea can be funded or should not be funded. There are too many good ideas falling through the cracks because the founders are not from the right school, or the founders don't have the right presentation skills and are just not getting in front of investors as much. And no, that's not been solved. There's, I think, a lot more work to be done there.
Yeah. And I guess, so far onus has been primarily on the enterprises to solve that, right? I guess the incubators, accelerators, investors are not themselves reaching out or creating those spaces where we can get more diverse pipeline coming in, right? Whether it is in terms of geography, going into the smaller cities. I know that, for example, Wilgrow does go to various small cities as form of iPitch, but whether it is going to some of these tier 2, tier 3 institutions. And the other bit I think there is that a lot of incubation is focused around tech side of it rather than the business and the sales side and the marketing side, which is where also I think scale becomes an issue because the tech has been developed, but then the scale remains a challenge. So I think, yeah, some messages for us to also take back within the innovation ecosystem. Ashish, there was a similar question to you as well, which is also a little focused on the gendered lens. And here the question is that Shell has been at the forefront of bringing more women in the energy space. But as entrepreneurs and as end users, what are the main takeaways so far?
So thanks for that. I think we have been evolving our sort of gender inclusion strategy over the last few years. We have um, earlier, like the focus was much more at, I would say, enterprise level. Like the way we would do our incubation or funding is look at, how gender processes are integrated, gender inclusion processes uh, in the day-to-day functioning or operations of the enterprise. Over the last few years, we have had, a few specific partnerships with FCDO India specifically, which is called Powered Program, which both of you are well aware of. I think one of the key learning from there was, as Sim was saying, like uh, there's quite a bit of dearth of pipeline, of investable enterprises. When you look at financing for in the sector. And we are trying to address that in a few ways. One is having specialized support through there's like experts in the sector, like Value for Women, who have come in to help look at the enterprise and create sort of ways to intervene, not just at the enterprise level, but also at the customer level. Like, how can you have uh, outcomes, target outcomes, which are tied to, let's say, benefiting or impacting women customers specifically. We have programs like we call Wahini with a e-rickshaw provider called SMV Solutions, where the goal was to bring in women drivers in the mix, and that we launched in Allahabad. And I think we need to do more of that, which we are continuing to develop under the Powering Livelihood program. But the other aspect to attract financing is the monetization of gender impact, which I'll touch on like on a couple of areas within monetization, just covering gender as well. There are methodologies developed, just as in carbon credit market, also for the gender impact market, uh, in by the standards body like the gold standards, which and we need to look at ways how we combine, we call co-benefits of carbon, of gender, and even health. And talking about cooking sector, Simi, I think one of the specific project we are doing more in East Africa at the moment is looking at monetizing these impact altogether. If you go to an outcome buyer and say that you want to sell a carbon credit, uh, versus if you go and say that we want to combine all these impact together with a standards methodology which is been approved and which has been sort of there's like a rigor around establishing that. So just to give a specific example, within health there's something called a dailies, which is equivalent of carbon credits in the carbon market. A daily stands for averted daily adjusted life years, just a complex way of saying that just because of having a healthier cooking uh, product, how many extra years of life's worth have you saved for a beneficiary? And there's scientific methodology established to measure that. So all that is to say that once we have these methodologies developed, I think we are uh, the whole sector in a way in monetization space has progressed over the last few years to capitalize on that. And we are doing this particular initiative, although right now in East Africa, but we want to replicate that in the cooking space and subsequently in other in energy for livelihood, for that sort of monetization to happen. And in line with with COP this year and the growing sort of green recovery narrative, I think there's a huge potential for like voluntary carbon markets to pick on such. So it's the right time to sort of rally behind such instruments and back them.
Great. Thanks, Ashish. If I may just quickly do a follow-up on that. Uh, where I would probably like to learn a little more is how the pipeline of such outcome funders is looking like. Like, are there enough takers? Is there enough interest?
Yeah,
Is it
good.
primarily the CSR money, or are there other ways in which some of these are getting picked up? So yeah, if you can quickly reflect on that.
Yeah, good question. I should touch on that when we talk about monetization. So in that particular pilot that I mentioned we are doing in East Africa, it took us 2 years to mobilize the outcome funders community and say, hey, there's something like forward looking and new we are doing in terms of monetizing health impact, not just carbon. uh, Finally we have got a outcome funder secured, which is like a foundation and not a CSR money in that particular context. And now our goal is to once that pilot is proven in terms of success of paying it out, we want to take it to creating an outcome funders facility where we are getting good interest from the multilaterals, like donors as well. So if you look at a number of, I can't name them specifically, but a lot of people who operate in sort of developmental donor financing. So the idea is to create that facility, reduce the overhead and transaction cost, and do it broadly for the sector. and again replicating it not just within East Africa but also in, like in the market in India. And it's just like I think there are other examples of DIBs and SIBs in India, like development impact bond and social impact bonds, where we are trying to sort of also sensitize and educate the public sector. Like there's one being done which is having a municipality as the outcome funder, and the performance-based payment that we make, an outcome-based payment. They are realizing how that can be quite catalytic, and they are developing their capability to sort of serve and design those serve and fund those sort of mechanisms out there.
Great, thanks for elaborating what kind of possibilities are there in terms of actually, I mean, as a researcher, I would say we are essentially trying to bring in the externalities, whether it is positive or negative, and actually putting a price to it. And that's the core market failure of the world in which we are. So I hope that if we scale some of these solutions up, we'll be able to solve for some of those externality pricing problems well. Let me now take a sort of similar question to both of you, so that our audience, particularly the enterprises among the audience, can get clear takeaways in terms of what is it that you are looking for. Like if I would say, Ashish, list down, or maybe let me start with Simi this time, that list down the top 2 or 3 things that you are looking from enterprises, so that you get more confident as a funder, as a financier in particular, you sort of able to unlock that financing to the enterprises. What would those be?
Okay, so I think beyond the obvious, right? There is essentially a strong founding team, and that we have confidence in, and lots of subjective things. I think objectively we are looking at very specifically. I think this is true for most lenders, right? Especially if you're doing funding for an asset that's going to be used for livelihoods. We're looking at, number one, that the technology works and it's proven to work, right? We get a lot of enterprises reach out to us saying, we have showcased this in a lab setting and we're doing our first project, can you fund it? The answer is no, right? As lenders, as financiers, we need to be 100% certain that the technology works and works in a real life setting. If you claim that the asset will be productive for 5 years, there is enough data to show that it will be productive for 5 years. If you say it's a 15-year asset, we need to know, how do we prove that, or how do we kind of, extrapolate that? But also, I think often enterprises, are not prepared to, essentially do the lifetime costing that, we absolutely need in terms of, it's not just, I'm going to sell the asset for X and it's going to get used, but also, will it need repairs? Are you as an enterprise? So I think if you go back to the early days of solar, right, when people started looking for 15-year solar project funding, one doubt that financiers would have is, but you as a developer, will you even last 15 years, right? That's gone away today because solar has become such a standard product. But if you're coming to us with a new technology, we need to know that you as a company is a viable business that's going to last for 5 years and I'm going to get a loan for, right? And typically loans have that horizon, 3 to 5 year horizon, especially for new technologies. So you're looking at, is the enterprise that's sponsoring this product viable, and does the product work? And I think the third is really just, establishing that there is enough room to repay the loan. So if I am funding an asset for 1 lakh rupees, what is the cash flow that this asset is generating? And how is that 1 lakh rupees plus interest going to come back to me over the next 3 to 5 years? And what's the level of confidence we have around that? So I think that's essentially it, right? I think everything else is just getting more data points to get comfort. But for most financiers, this is a decision point. That is what you're looking for.
Yeah. And if I may just quickly add one of the questions which have come again, particularly for you, which also talks about the impact of COVID. Like, how does it has impacted NBFCs like yours and your own risk appetite to enter new segments like energy for livelihood or energy for productive use?
So I can talk for the market, because we obviously work with a lot of financiers who we connect our startups to in terms of getting them loans. I think when COVID first hit, right, last year, March, April, pretty much everyone stopped lending because not because it didn't have funds, but because there was no way to gauge how long this will last, how to, price the uncertainty. And then people had issues about their existing borrowers not paying, restructurings happening. All of that is behind us. I think from pretty much, I would say September, October of last year, pretty much every lender is back to normal. And they have liquidity, everybody has funds to deploy, and they are essentially looking to do new deals. One change that definitely happened is that lenders are, because there is a higher demand for capital today than there's funding available, as is pretty much always the case. I think lenders are prioritizing segments that they think are less susceptible to COVID. So things like food, supply chains, healthcare are getting more funding today. Education is getting more funding today compared to something that I would say is more discretionary spend. So something like fashion or textiles probably would be, a back of a lender's mind, but an agri company would be on the forefront of it. So that's one change that we're definitely seeing.
Great. Thanks, Amy. I do see now Mr. Jethani has joined us. So thank you, Mr. Jethani, for coming in.
Abhishek, if I may interrupt, I'm sorry. I would request Mr. Jethani to please switch on his video so that the audience could look at him.
Yeah, actually, I have already conveyed that
Wonderful.
in the chat.
Thanks. Wonderful. Great.
Thank you, Mr. Jethani. I know that there are multiple meetings that you are right now juggling with, so we'll try and keep it prompt for you.
So I have just few minutes with me because I have another meeting at 3 o'clock. The people are waiting for me.
Yeah. So I think what would be really interesting and important for the audience to hear, which include a lot of enterprises, a lot of investors and financiers who are looking at this energy for productive use, energy livelihood space, is to hear like what is the government view, what is government thinking. There was a draft policy which came in October. So if you could just give a little understanding to the sector that how the government is looking at this and what we can expect in the coming months, I think that would be great.
Definitely, I think you'll be hearing a very good outcome from the government side. We may come out with a good policy for rural livelihood applications. So as our number of things are there.
Okay, I guess we'll just wait for a minute or so because Jethani doesn't have a lot of time. Let's hear him first. So I'll just.
Sorry. So some call from minister's office. So as I said that we have already issued a draft policy, and what we have felt during this outbreak of COVID-19 when the migrant labor was coming back to their villages, and they are also feeling that there should be some economic activities available in their village itself. So energy, of course, is required whenever you go for some economic activities, and the reliable energy availability is an issue, in particular in the villages and remote areas. Though we say that now all the villages are electrified, households are getting electricity, but still there are some issues in the village areas regarding the reliability of the electricity. And for all economic activities, we feel that reliability of electricity or energy is a must. So DRE solutions can provide reliable source. Suppose in a farm where you want a cold storage. So electricity may not be available in the farm because it's limited to 8 hours or so. Even getting an electricity connection at farm end is really challenging. You can get the electricity for your solar pump, so for your irrigation pumps, but maybe difficult for getting a cold storage and other things because they will be charged at the commercial rates. So such kind of issues are there. So in such situations, we feel that this DRE solution can provide a better option, a reliable source of energy. And also these can be used as a mobile kind of applications where you can, if you are going to some other place, you can take your this DRE application along with you and you can work on it. So, and also we have felt that the different ministries are also providing some kind of support for different applications, like Ministry of Agriculture. They are providing support for the solar dryer, solar cold storages. On the other hand, the Ministry of Rural Development is doing something different for some other applications. Ministry of Textile is providing some part of subsidy for some of the DRE application. Then MSME industry, they are providing some sort of subsidy for the solar charkha and other things. The Ministry of Health is providing not directly for rural livelihood, but indirectly while doing some refrigeration for vaccination and other things. They are providing some kind of activity, subsidies or financial support, where the renewable energy is used for these applications. So we felt that why not we coordinate as a Ministry of Renewable Energy, we should coordinate, because until unless there is a proper guidelines, proper standards, proper quality control, proper awareness is there, these things cannot be promoted. So there is a need for having a broad policy wherein we can coordinate all such issues, and of course financing. Financing a rather challenging issue. DRE applications are there, though they are some of them are viable, but some of them needs initial support, because these all are the innovative things, not on a very large scale of economies. So primarily these are very small quantities, and people are not aware of it. Those who are using it may find it difficulty regarding their repair and maintenance, their uses. In mostly these applications are being used in the remote areas, so there they are finding such kind of difficulties, particularly the reliability of the equipment. Then if there is any small problem in the equipment, they have to wait for a few days, maybe sometimes a week or 15 days to get it repaired and everything. So to have a proper policy framework in place for the DRE applications, we have brought out a draft policy, and we invited the stakeholder comments on that. We got the comments, and Abhishek and his team has also supported us in doing some kind of evaluation of these comments. And soon we are going to put up final policy. But before that, I think another round of consultation may be required. The earlier draft was very, well, let's say it's the initial draft, and then we got some comments. And based on the comments, I would again suggest that we should go for another round of consultation, maybe a quick round of consultation, not very delayed, like we are already delayed. It was, I think in October we came out with this draft, and still we have not finalized it. So maybe we can hope that by June end, we can come out with a final policy. And thereafter, some of scheme emerging from these policy documents will be worked out. So that is all from my side. And if there are any quick questions, I can take up.
Yeah, I think just a quick follow-up, Jathanji. You actually covered quite a few points, whether it is interministerial coordination, the O&M challenge, or even financing. On financing, I just had a quick follow-up that, I mean, we have financiers also as part of the co-panels. Simi particularly is running an NBFC. I think what is interesting to hear from you would be, yeah.
Yeah, it's great to hear about the policy update, hopefully by June.
Sorry, sorry,
Yeah.
secretary has called up. Yeah.
No worries. No, but I was moving towards was particularly for financing. What is it that government and financiers can do together to unlock larger pool of monies? I mean, government resources are always very limited. So, what is it that the two can do together so that we can unlock more? And in fact, Simi, I think mentioned earlier before you joined in that different structures are now emerging, particularly whether it is partial risk guarantees, first loss guarantees, etc. So is there any thinking around that? If you may want to elaborate. Yeah.
So as I earlier said, the financing is another issue where we have to take care. Low cost financing should be available. So one is this, we can leverage on this credit guarantee, or sometimes we can also use this Kisan credit card that is also available. And similar instruments may also be worked out with regional rural banks and some cooperative banks. So for that also, I think we should have some consultation.
Yeah.
While framing our broad policy. So these are some of the issues which I think has not come up in the draft policy what we have floated earlier. And based on these comments, I think we can prepare another draft and another round of consultation. So maybe we can float a next draft by April, and by May end we can get the comments evaluated, and thereafter in June we can finalize the policy.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we can particularly bring in some financiers, investors also into the conversation if we do that next round of consultation to ensure that these views are also getting reflected in the policy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. I know you are running late for your next meeting, so we'll not hold you back further. But thank you for joining in and sharing some of this perspective. I think entire sector is certainly looking forward to this policy coming out to move things forward further. Thank you, Jitani for joining us today.
Mr. Jitani, look forward to talking.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I would not given much time.
No, that's all right. Thank you. Okay. On back of that, let me continue with the last question, which we sort of left in between. And Simi had already given her view, but I was quickly going to turn to Ashish to just quickly understand what are the 2 or 3 things that you would be looking for from enterprises wearing a investor's hat.
Yeah. So I think just continuing on where Simi was talking about, I think as an investor, if if it's like a pure commercial hat I have to wear, it's the first and foremost thing that an investor looks at is the financial discipline. So the accounting discipline, how well have you maintained that? Is there even audited account are some of the investor wouldn't even talk to you if they don't have audited accounts. But I guess that comes in even in a bit more sort of established enterprise sometime. But at the in the context we're talking about, like energy for livelihood type micro enterprise or enterprises, I think one of the crucial thing we have learned at Shell Foundation is creating that sort of data monitoring platform for yourself, where you can have live timestamp data for the assets that you have deployed. And earlier, like few years ago, it used to be very it would be a very cost intensive exercise to have any things like sensors to put on your assets to do that sort of monitoring. However, now there's quite a bit of low cost sensor based technologies out there, and there's quite a bit of proliferation of that in some of the enterprises that we work in, especially in Africa. If you look at a lot of solar home system types enterprises which have scaled up and attract a lot of venture backed money, they have these cloud platform to do that monitoring of each and every data that they have asset they have deployed in a live timestamped manner, and that helps them attract quite a bit of investor interest, because they are creating so much of evidence. And there are economies of scale to be realized there if you have that sort of initial investment when you make a sensor. So that was a bit more on the forward-looking areas, but other than that, from enterprises, I think we already touched on the gender aspect. There are a lot of gender-focused financing coming out. So if you can demonstrate that within your enterprise at a both at the customer level and enterprise level, you can attract that. So gender disaggregated data, we call, is is what would be useful. And I think lastly, on the enterprise side, I guess there's if you have like an R&D sort of roadmap, which helps you sort of convey the sort of your vision to your initial investors, that really helps drive a lot of forward-looking conversations, because a lot of time we don't see enough um, growth opportunity in the tech-based ag tech companies, especially the ones we have worked in Africa, because they don't know how to continue innovating. Like if you move from MSME to SME size, sometimes you're just have to focus on growth. That's a very thin line of balance, like how you focus on that particular growth angle versus how to continue working on your product improvement.
Yeah, thanks, Ashish. Again, you've touched quite a few interesting points. There is one theme, I mean, there are a few themes emerging, but one theme which I think I should underscore once again. Clearly, the role of evidence and data is coming out pretty strongly, and why enterprises individually and probably also collectively need to look at that so that we can have a stronger story for individual enterprises and for the sector. The two, I think, and this is something Mr. Jethani also touched upon quite categorically, is how the performance of the asset is on the ground. I mean, you used an example of going extremely on the technology side and making sure that you are able to monitor it real time. The other is just ensuring that the basic O&M services are happening as and when the customer need it. But both ultimately converge at the same point, that how do you ensure good after-sales services for the products so that even if it is a product which has a credit associated with and the end user has taken a loan, they are willing and happy to actually pay back that loan because they are getting the continued service of the product, right? So it sort of links, it sort of underpins a lot of discussion that we are having. And a big message, I guess, which needs to relay back to the enterprises, that while focus on the tech, the product, the business model, etc., all needs to happen, alongside a significant focus on how do we manage the after-sales services is very critical. I know it's a hard challenge because the scale at which some of these enterprises are, it's small enough for them to figure out the after-sales services in a reasonably cost-effective manner. But I think there are now companies which can even offer you after-sales services as a service, so that if you don't have a network or after-sale, you are able to manage that. I know we're just about time, but there are a couple of additional comments that have come in. I'll briefly try and do justice to them. The first one is that IT World has NASSCOM, which aggregates and sort of views from the sector and represent the sector. Is there a need for a similar organization for productive use segment? I don't know if either of you would like to quickly take this up. Yeah.
I'll give a quick answer. So yes and no. I do agree there's a need for some sort of platform to do, let's say, MIS data collection across the sector, and in a way data sort of anonymized, which is like their enterprises are willing to share. However, I don't know if there's a case for having a sort of industry association or like that. There the work that Clean is doing in India is amazing, for example, and why we can latch onto that and say they can host this sort of tech platform, which can be catalytic for the sector.
I'd second that. I would say Clean's already there, and there's no need for something new because Clean's doing a great job.
Great. Okay, I know we are really running out of time, so sorry for one question which we couldn't take now, and I really don't have time to even summarize this discussion. But yeah, Anushka, over to you.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you, Ashish and Simi as well for such an informative panel discussion. And of course, special thanks to Mr. Jethani for providing his valuable time and insights for us. I'm sure I speak on behalf of the audience as well when I say that this was a truly informative session and especially useful for all our energy startups in the room. To the audience, if you want to get connected to anyone on the panel separately, you can do so via the Hubilo platform. Coming up next, we have a session on navigating the road to IPs for healthcare social enterprises and a masterclass on the farming risk matrix and how to address it. We also have Abhilash from Omnivore and Deepak from Shell Foundation waiting to network with the entrepreneurs in the networking lounges. So see you all again very soon. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ashish and Simi. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.